Hey there, I'm Julia, and I've recently celebrated my 42nd birthday, a milestone that feels both surreal and empowering. Ever since I was a little girl, I've dreamed of building a life where I could stand on my own 2 feet. Independence wasn't just a goal for me, it was a calling. Over the years, I've worked tirelessly to carve out a life I'm proud of, a life where I can say, I did this. From the moment I entered the professional world, I knew I wanted to be smart about money and seize every opportunity to grow. This drive wasn't something I stumbled upon, it was instilled in me from a young age. My mom, a wise and hardworking woman, always emphasized the importance of financial independence. She'd say, Julia, don't just wait for life to hand you something, go out there and earn it. Those words became my mantra as I pursued my dreams in the corporate world, eventually finding my passion in strategy analysis. Meeting Albert was a turning point in my life. He's the kind of person who lights up a room with his warmth and kindness. From our very first conversation, I felt a sense of comfort and connection that I hadn't experienced before. Falling in love with him was easy, but navigating the dynamics with his family was anything but. His sister, brother, and mother didn't exactly welcome me with open arms. In fact, their chilly demeanor made me question whether I'd ever truly belong in their world. But love has a way of making you persevere, and despite the challenges, Albert and I tied the knot. Now, here we are, 12 years into our marriage. We've had our fair share of laughter, love, and of course, the occasional storm. Life isn't always perfect, but it's ours. Lately, though, I've sensed a shift in Albert, a distance that I can't quite put my finger on, and if I'm honest, I think it started a few months ago, on a day that should have been one of our happiest. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I had just wrapped up a long day at work, but I wasn't tired, far from it. I was bursting with excitement, practically skipping through the front door with a grin I couldn't contain. Albert was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in hand. Hey, babe, he greeted me, his voice warm and familiar. Hey, honey, I replied, my tone practically singing with joy. Guess what happened today? He looked up, curiosity dancing in his eyes. What? Tell me. I could hardly get the words out fast enough. I got a promotion, I exclaimed, throwing my hands in the air. Can you believe it? They actually picked me for the role I've been eyeing for months. Before I knew it, I was doing our signature happy dance, a silly, joyous tradition we'd created over the years. This wasn't just any dance, it was sacred to us, a celebration reserved for life's biggest and best moments. We danced like this at our engagement party, at our wedding, when we found out I was pregnant, and even after smaller victories like nailing a tough presentation or finding the perfect vacation spot. But as I twirled and clapped, something felt off. Albert wasn't joining in, he just stood there, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. My excitement faltered, and I stopped mid-spin, staring at him in confusion. Why aren't you dancing with me? I asked, half laughing, half concerned. He sighed, the kind of sigh that's heavy with unspoken words. I'm happy for you, babe, he said, but his voice lacked the usual enthusiasm that made our happy dances feel magical. I frowned, the joy of my promotion now tinged with worry. What's wrong? You don't seem happy. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes dropping to the floor. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. I got laid off today. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too still, as if the air itself had been sucked out. My heart ached for him, and guilt crept in for having been so caught up in my own excitement. Oh, Albert, I said softly, stepping closer to him, I'm so sorry, that's awful. He shrugged, attempting a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, well, that's life, isn't it? You win some, you lose some. But I could see the pain behind his casual tone, the weight he was trying so hard to hide. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. We'll figure this out together, I said, trying to convey every ounce of love and support I felt for him. That night, the kitchen became a place not of celebration, but of reflection. We sat together at the table, talking about what this news meant for us, for our plans, and for our future. It was a stark reminder that life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. But no matter what, I knew one thing for certain, we were a team, and we'd face whatever came our way, together. Hey there, I'm Julia, and I've just celebrated my 42nd birthday, a moment that feels both surreal and reflective. If there's one thing that has defined me for as long as I can remember, It's my unwavering desire for independence. From the very beginning, I've been drawn to the idea of forging my own path, working hard, and building a life that's truly mine. My journey into the professional world was marked by one guiding principle: be smart with money and seize every opportunity for growth. This wasn't just a personal goal, it was a value instilled in me by my mom, who taught me early on that financial independence was the cornerstone of a fulfilling life. Her wisdom resonated with me as I embarked on my career in corporate strategy analysis, a field that not only challenged me intellectually but also allowed me to fulfill my ambitions. Then came Albert, the man who would change my life in ways I never anticipated. Meeting him was like finding the missing piece to a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. Albert is the kindest, most genuine person I've ever met, and being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being cooped up for too long. But as wonderful as Albert is, his family was an entirely different story. From the start, his sister, brother, and mother made no secret of their disapproval. Their coldness was palpable, and their disapproval lingered like a shadow over our relationship. Still, Albert and I forged ahead, marrying despite their lack of support. Over the past 12 years, our marriage has been a tapestry woven with joy, struggles, and lessons learned. We've had moments that made us laugh until we cried and moments that tested the very foundation of our bond. Yet, lately, I've felt something shift, a distance, a tension I can't quite put my finger on. It all seemed to trace back to a day that's seared into my memory. That day, I came home from work practically glowing with excitement, eager to share some incredible news. As I walked into the kitchen, Albert was there to greet me, his familiar smile a welcome sight. "Hey, babe," he said warmly. "Hey, honey," I replied, my voice practically vibrating with joy. "Guess what happened today?" Intrigued, Albert urged me to spill the news. "I got promoted," I announced, unable to contain my excitement. In that moment, all the hard work, the late nights,
the sacrifices, it all felt worth it.
As if on autopilot, I launched into our signature happy dance, a tradition that had become a staple in our marriage. From our engagement to our wedding, from a positive pregnancy test to career milestones, this quirky little dance had always been our way of celebrating life's sweetest victories together. But something was off. As I twirled and clapped, Albert didn't join in. He stood there, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confused, I stopped mid-spin and asked, "Why aren't you dancing with me?" He sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of an invisible burden. "I'm happy for you, babe," he said, but his voice lacked the enthusiasm I was used to. A knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't like Albert. I pressed gently, hoping to understand what was going on. That's when he dropped the bombshell. I found myself in a truly unique position to help Albert. Though we'd always preferred to work at separate companies to preserve our individual careers and keep our professional lives distinct from our personal relationship, life has a way of throwing curveballs, and in our case, desperate times called for some unconventional measures. Albert had always been an independent man. Much like me, we both valued our careers and the autonomy they gave us. But when the unexpected happened, when the weight of his layoff threatened to shake the very foundation of our lives, I knew I had to step in. As much as I didn't want to cross the boundary we'd set for ourselves, the urgency of the situation left me with no choice but to propose something I'd never thought I'd do. "Actually, you might not need to look elsewhere for a job," I began one evening, my voice tinged with both hesitation and determination. "I think I can secure something for you at my workplace." I knew what I was suggesting wasn't small. It wasn't just offering him a job, it was inviting him into my world, into the very place where I'd built my own career and identity. We had worked hard to keep our professional lives separate, not wanting to be just the husband and wife team at the office. But given how precarious our situation was, and the sudden shift in Albert's confidence after being laid off, it seemed like the only solution that could work. Albert looked at me for a moment, processing my words, before nodding slowly. He trusted me, and I could see in his eyes that he was desperate for stability, desperate enough to accept an offer that, in any other circumstance, he might have refused. So, I leveraged every connection I had at the company, pulling strings and using my goodwill to arrange a job for him. It wasn't an easy process, and it required me to navigate some tricky professional waters. But in the end, I managed to secure a position that seemed like a perfect fit. It wasn't just about helping him, it was also about the relief it brought to both of us, knowing that we had found a way through the storm together. Months went by, and Albert was flourishing in his new role. It was nothing short of remarkable to watch him evolve. He was gaining confidence, proving himself, and making strides in his career that I hadn't expected. I watched with pride as he came into his own, seeing a version of him that I hadn't witnessed in a long time. His once stagnant career had taken flight, and it seemed like we were finally getting back on track. Then, one evening, Albert came home with a smile that stretched from ear to ear. "I've invited my mom, Abigail, and Roy over for dinner tonight," he said, almost bouncing with excitement. "I've got something important to share with everyone." At first, I was taken aback. Albert had never been one to seek validation from his family, especially not from Abigail and Roy, who had never been particularly kind to me. Still, I could sense that something big was happening, and I could hardly contain my curiosity. I agreed to make dinner, preparing his favorite dishes, eager to see what this important news was. When they arrived, we all sat down to eat, and Albert couldn't hold back his enthusiasm. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with excitement, and with a dramatic pause, he made his announcement. "I got promoted," he exclaimed, his voice full of pride. The room erupted in cheers. Abigail and Roy congratulated him with smiles, and even I couldn't help but feel a swell of joy for him. It was a moment I had dreamed of for him, and it was clear how much he had worked for it. Despite my initial surprise at the speed of his advancement, I was genuinely happy to see him so fulfilled. I'd watched him struggle for so long, and now, to see him thriving, was a victory in itself. But just as the celebration seemed to reach its peak, Albert handed me something, a small, sleek hotel key card. I blinked in confusion, unsure of what he meant. Was this a surprise for us, a romantic getaway? The thought of escaping for a night felt like a blessing, especially after everything we'd been through. I smiled, imagining how nice it would be to have a break from the stress of our lives. "No," Albert said, his voice soft but firm. "It's not for both of us, it's for you." I froze, trying to make sense of his words. "For me?" I repeated, utterly confused. The atmosphere in the room shifted. My in-laws exchanged knowing looks, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something wasn't right. "What's going on?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking as I tried to make sense of the situation. Abigail leaned forward, her tone matter of fact. "Albert and I have had a lot of talks recently," she began. "He's been doing so well at his job, and we think it's time for him to take a step back and reconsider some of his choices." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We didn't appreciate your attitude during our last visit. You were dismissive of Albert's success, and frankly, we think it's time for you both to take some space." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. They were suggesting that Albert and I should take a break from each other, not because of any personal conflict, but because they believed I had been mistreating him now that he was financially independent. The realization that my husband was being influenced so heavily by his family, to the point where he might agree with their assessment, was heart-wrenching. My gaze fell on Albert, silently pleading for him to say something, anything, to refute this absurd suggestion, but instead, he avoided my eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "Are you really doing this?" I whispered, my voice thick with betrayal. "You're really going to kick me out of our home?" The response from Abigail and Roy was cold and unyielding, as if they'd planned this moment down to the smallest detail. They spoke of traditional values and outdated ideals, the man as the head of the household, the one who made the final decisions. My contributions, both emotional and financial, seemed irrelevant in their eyes. Anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal surged within me. I couldn't contain it any longer. Without another word, I stood up, grabbed a few belongings, and stormed out of the house. The weight of everything crashed down on me, and as I made my way to my best friend's house, I felt the tears fall freely, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I spent the night in a blur of emotions, questioning how we had reached such a low point. How had Albert, my partner of 12 years, been swayed so easily by his family? How had things gotten so broken? But as the night wore on, my sense of despair began to shift. The anger that had burned inside me was now tempered with a fierce determination. If they thought they could break me, they had another thing coming. The next morning, after a restless night,
I made a decision.
I would find out exactly what had been going on with Albert's sudden financial success. The bonuses, the promotion, none of it had added up, and I was going to uncover the truth. I took the day off work, telling my boss I was sick, and returned home to search for answers. Albert was at work, and I knew I had a window of time to investigate. I made my way to his office and immediately began looking through his files. It didn't take long for me to find what I was searching for. There, buried in the clutter, were the telltale signs of his betrayal: emails, documents, and records detailing how Albert had been embezzling funds from our company. The shocking truth was staring me in the face: he hadn't just been promoted. He had been involved in an illicit scheme with our new boss to funnel company money directly into their pockets. My heart sank as I absorbed the full scope of the betrayal. With steady hands, I copied every piece of incriminating evidence onto a USB drive. Knowing that I couldn't return home yet, not after what I had uncovered, I packed a few more things, and with a heavy heart, I returned to my friend's house to figure out my next move. The following day, I prepared for what I knew would be the most difficult thing I'd ever done. I crafted an email, requesting an urgent meeting with the company's leadership, keeping the details vague. At the same time, I informed Albert of an emergency meeting about fiscal planning. I wanted him to think nothing of it, to walk into that room without suspecting anything. When the meeting finally took place, I could feel the tension in the air. Albert and our new boss arrived last, their faces pale and stricken with panic at the sight of the company's higher-ups gathered in one room. I didn't hesitate. I took control of the meeting, laying out the evidence I had gathered with cold precision. The room was filled with gasps of disbelief, followed by outrage. Executives whispered furiously, and one even suggested that Albert and our boss might face jail time for their actions. Through it all, Albert's glares burned into me, his eyes full of fury, yet I stood firm, refusing to back down. This wasn't about revenge, it was about standing up for what was right. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the personal cost.